Moving on. Financial report finally for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017. Robin.
Yes, this is our fiscal year-end financial report. Typically, I bring it to you in December after we've had the audit concluded. The city's auditors are here presently this week, and they were here last week. If there's any adjustment to these balances, of course, I will let you know. I'm fairly confident that we reviewed everything in great detail prior to their arrival. So if we have adjustments, they should be fairly minor. And with that, I'll get right into the details. First, I'm going to provide you with a summary of the general fund budget. And then after that, the city's water and wastewater operating funds. Those are the three major operating funds of the city. All the other funds that we have and that we use to track money coming in and out of the city are typically very restrictive in nature as to what we can use them for. But these are the funds that we use for operating. This is a summary of the general fund budget versus actual in millions of dollars at the highest level, including the beginning fund balance as of July 1st, 2016, the revenues, total expenditures, and fund balance remaining at the end of the fiscal year. The original fiscal year budget for expenditures was $40 million. To that, we added a total of $1.9 million in supplemental appropriations, which included $948,000 for grant funds, prior year purchase order encumbrance commitments of $462,000, strike team overtime of $230,000, fire FLSA back pay $121,000, a transfer of CIP funds for park mulch from the CIP budget to the operating budget, $94,000, and other items of just under $48,000. This brought the total final budgeted expenditures to $41,955,000. Actual expenditures ended the year at just under $39.1 million, or under budget by $2.87 million. This savings includes $555,000 in purchase order carryovers that will carry over into fiscal year 17-18, and $584,000 in grant-funded programs that will also carry over and be spent in 17-18. So the true amount that we were actually under budget at the end of the fiscal year can more accurately be described as just over $1.7 million. This still represents a significant amount of savings. The savings is entirely related to salaries and benefits due to vacant positions. Material, supplies, and service accounts, or MS&S as we call them in finance, were actually overexpended at the end of the fiscal year due to using professional services contracts in order to get the work done where there were employee vacancies. Savings occurred across almost all departments and line items of the budget. I'll show you a breakdown of the savings both by department and by line items in later slides. We ended the fiscal year with an uncommitted fund balance which meets City Council's fiscal policy of a 15% reserve equal to the 17-18 appropriations level. My next several slides will focus on revenues, and then I will transition to expenditures. This shows you the city's sales tax revenues in millions of dollars. It has 10 years of historical revenues, so you can see what the trends have been over time. The city's gross sales tax from fiscal year 07-08 through fiscal year 16-17. It shows you that revenues declined significantly during the recession but began recovering in fiscal year 10-11. And in 15-16, it appears to be inflated. It is because we received $824,000 of one-time money due to the state's elimination of the triple flip. So that it appears here that it went down. It didn't actually go down. If you took that out, we would see an increase. This shows you the quarterly sales tax results on a cash basis. And I do want to note that the fiscal year 16-17 amount here, this is correct at 3.3%. Is that a little brighter, Terrell? Yeah, it shows that. Thank you. This bottom one I had in my staff report a typo. It said 3.0. I'm probably the only one that noticed that, but it should be 3.3, which also threw off the average for the 4 quarters. It is actually 1.65%, which is still well below the 3.5% that we budgeted for. But the financial report, I said 1.575, and when I noticed that that was wrong in the financial report, I updated it. So the average for the year, the increase was 1.65%, again, well below the 3.5% that we projected when we budgeted. This compares the quarterly results on both a cash basis and an adjusted basis. The cash basis is the money that actually appears in our bank account every month. The Board of Equalization does a wire transfer into the city's bank account for what they show as advance payments for 2 months, and then they do a cleanup payment for the third month of the quarter. The adjusted is important as well, though, because that's eventually any irregularities. If somebody missed a payment or if they have an overpayment, the cash will eventually, the audited balance will eventually catch up with the cash and will be adjusted, and will either receive more or have less coming in. So I always like to show everybody both amounts. This shows you the city's property tax revenues. Our revenues peaked in fiscal year 07-08 and continued downward at a steady decline until fiscal year 12-13, at which time they slowly began to increase, with the largest increase occurring in fiscal year 16-17. You can also see that we are almost back to where we once were. This chart shows you the historical home sales price in Yuba City from the year 2002 through the first quarter of 2017, and includes the average price and the median price of homes. By looking at the lines on the chart, you can see the trend upward in 2017 has continued, even though it is down just slightly as far as the average price for the last quarter. We see that home prices tend to follow the trend line of what we see in our property tax revenues. That's why we always look at this. And HDL, our property tax consultant, has advised us that we probably will not see property taxes back up as far as home sale prices going as high as they once were, but instead a very steady increase over time, which is better because then we won't likely see a steep decline like we saw before. This is the city's historical franchise fees over the last 10 years. The trend shows a smaller decline during the recession and steady increases since fiscal year 11-12. Recreation program revenues shows they peaked in fiscal year 08-09 when the GAP facility opened, then declined during the recession, and have recovered with small increases in the past 2 fiscal years. Building permit revenues, you can see how volatile this one is following the development activity level within the city. Shows the very large decline in permit revenues with a return to a higher level, fairly stable for the last 3 fiscal years, and then a large increase in fiscal year 16-17. Business license revenues. They show only a small dip during the recession, with growth occurring in every year since fiscal year 10-11. Hotel motel surcharge revenues. You can again see the decline, with the lowest year being in fiscal year 9-10, with recovery in recent years to a peak in fiscal year 16-17. And the last individual revenue is the CSAG revenues, which show a decline from 06-07 through fiscal year 11-12, and then increasing through fiscal year 16-17. This is a slide of the city's total general fund revenues for each fiscal year. The previous peak was in fiscal year 07-08 at $37.2 million. With declines until fiscal year 10-11, where they essentially remained flat for 3 years. We saw an increase of just over $1 million in fiscal year 13-14, an increase of $2.2 million in 14-15, an increase of $1.69 million in 15-16, and $1.65 million in 16-17, with 16-17 reaching a peak all-time for City of Yuba City at $40.705 million. Next, I will transition to discussing general fund expenses. This slide represents the citywide total expenditures for salaries and benefits combined. Previously, salaries and benefits were the highest in 08-09, then declined due to the furlough programs. Citywide expenditures have been increasing since fiscal year 12-13 and would be quite a bit higher than they are shown here if not for the large number of vacant positions throughout the city. As an example, in June 2017, the total amount budgeted citywide for positions which were vacant, but going through the various stages of the recruitment process was just over $5.2 million, with the general fund share being about $4.2 million. So it's a significant dollar amount. This is the same information, but it's citywide salaries in millions. It's just salaries and includes all regular full-time city employees, plus overtime and extra help wages. The trend of this graph is very similar to that of the previous chart for salaries and benefits. The next one will show a different trend. I'll go back to the last one for just a second. You can see that these hills and valleys kind of follow each other. This next one is significantly different for benefits. Shows why our costs keep going up. Shows that there was a small decline during the recession when furloughs were in place. But look at the increases since fiscal year 13-14. This is even with the large vacancy savings that I just talked about. It is clear that the cost of employee benefits are on the rise.
Should we say CalPERS?
And that leads to my next slide. This is the citywide retirement costs. The increasing and decreasing trend lines here somewhat mirror that of the previous slide for total employee benefits, because retirement is the largest cost component of those benefits. I also want to make note that the slide shows a decline in fiscal year 15-16 retirement costs. Again, this is largely due to vacant positions. If not for the vacancy savings, this would be a much higher total. Finance and HR continue to analyze vacant positions on a quarterly basis and evaluating the general fund positions during the last fiscal year. The low point was in December 2016 with 25 vacancies in the general fund, and the high point was in June of 2017 with 36 vacancies, which represents approximately 16% of the total positions budgeted. Of course, human resources continues to place a large priority on recruiting qualified candidates to fill those vacancies. Total general fund expenditures as a percentage of what was budgeted. So if you look at salaries and benefits, the gold represents the percentage of the actual portion of the budget spent. And for this fiscal year end, it equaled 92.4% of the amounts budgeted. I always compare this to previous fiscal years going backwards, just to get an idea of how it compares to prior years. In fiscal year 15-16, we spent 94% of the amounts budgeted, so we're less this year at 92.4. The year prior was 93.8. Before that was 95.7, and before that 97.8. For a 10-year average, it was 97.5 at one point in time, and we've seen significant declines in the increases in the savings and declines in the percentage of salaries and benefits spent over time. And again, it's due to the vacancies that we see. They're one-time in nature. We cannot reprogram them on an ongoing basis because they aren't expected to reoccur once the vacant positions are filled. The savings generated from vacant positions this year equaled about $2.38 million in unspent appropriations. This amount compared to the prior year, it was $1.84 in the previous year, so a little bit more this year. Total general fund expenditures in millions of dollars shows the declines, with things being relatively flat from fiscal year 10-11 through fiscal year 13-14, and increasing each year since then, with an all-time high reached in fiscal year 16-17 of $39.084 million. I looked at this and I asked myself, what would the total have been without all of the vacant positions? Which in March of 2017, the vacancies added had a cost of just over $4 million, which if you add that in, it would put us at about $43 million, which we would then have a deficit again. So the vacancies have really helped us because our revenues have not kept up with the total cost, if you will. This is the amount saved on a budgeted basis, on a department by department basis. So almost every general fund department returned a portion of their budget as unspent, with the exception of the city attorney budget. But I want to point out that that's not due to city attorney charges. Looking at the separation there and how we budget for things, it was due to our personnel attorneys, which are separate from our city attorney, Tim Hayes. We've had a lot of activity going on with personnel attorneys this year, which caused this to be overexpended. And that was the only departmental unit that was over budget at the end of the year. And we added money into the 17-18 budget to materials, supplies, and services because we have held the line for almost 10 years with only special requests getting added into materials, supplies, and services. So I don't expect it to be a problem for fiscal year 17-18. And this is on a line item basis. I think the fact that several line items go over in expenditures shows just how strong the need was for adding money to the city's general fund budget for materials, supplies, and services. That's the second page of the underexpended or overexpended amounts for materials, supplies, and services.
Would you, for a moment, go back to the last one? I want to ask, heat and power. That's a pretty significant over. Was there an audit done as to the reason that that was at 135%? Was there any trail that we could follow as to why?
I think it's because we hadn't added to budgets hardly at all for 10 years, and power costs have continued to go up. We have added in some energy efficiency improvements and are paying for the debt service through anticipated energy savings. But we have went back and done kind of an internal audit, if you will, to make sure that those contracts have saved the amount of money that they said that they would, and they have.
We're on schedule for the future savings, but there's still, unlike the one that we just approved, that's going to be the way it should be. We like it. Yes, sir.
And to the mayor, if I could just add, that probably mirrors a lot of our personal residences where we've all seen increases in the last year of probably the same percentages for each of us. So.
Overall, it shows we spent 93.2% of our total budget. I know this is a really busy slide, but I like to show council side by side the revenues and the expenditures over a 10-year period. In this particular slide, revenues are in blue, expenditures are in yellow, and you can see which years we were deficit spending and where we've been the last several years. In fiscal year 13-14, the surplus, if you will, at the end of the fiscal year where revenues exceeded expenditures was $645,000. That increased to $1.81 million in fiscal year 14-15, $1.75 million in 15-16, and was $1.62 million in 16-17. With that, I'll move on to water and wastewater funds. This is a summary of the city's water utility at the highest level on a budget versus actual basis. Operating revenues came in almost 6.3% less than budgeted, or $772,300. Water sales were $846,600 less than budgeted, combined with two other operating revenues that exceeded budget expectations. Billing penalties were $11,300 higher, and investment income was $51,700 higher than what we projected. Capital connection fee revenues were $76,300 higher, and capital-related investment income was $41,800 higher than what we budgeted. Operating expenditures ended the year $1.2 million, or about 13.6% under budget. The savings occurred in many categories, including $452,000 in salaries and benefits, $70,000 in heat and power, $124,000 in professional services, $184,000 in chemicals, and just under $60,000 in water purchases. This slide is a summary of the calculation we prepare for the city's bond rating agencies called the debt coverage ratio. It is shown here in thousands of dollars. In the calculation, we take total revenues, including capital connection fee revenues, and subtract operating expenses to get net revenues. Per the city's bond covenants, this ratio must be maintained at a level of at least 1.2 or 120%. These numbers down here. The city's ratio dropped to 1.29% in fiscal year 14-15, still meeting our required ratio, but not by much. In fiscal year 15-16, the ratio increased back up to 1.44%, but that included one-time capital connection fee revenues from the Prop 84 waterline project of $1.6 million. The next slide shows you that for that year, they would have been below the threshold without that $1.6 million in connection fees. I bring that up again just to reiterate how important it was for us to do the rate increases that we did. I know it was a painful process and citizens weren't in favor of it, of course, but it was absolutely necessary in order to meet the terms and conditions of our bond covenants. In fiscal year 17-18, the budget as adopted represents a ratio of 1.59, so we continue to meet our bond covenants with that. I wanted to show council where this stands with our water connection fee fund. When you get our comprehensive annual financial report, our audit report from our auditors, you don't see this in the audit report anywhere because they roll up all of our water enterprise funds into one presentation and includes the operating fund, the debt service funds, the capital improvement funds, and the capital connection fee funds. But when we issued debt, we specifically allocated that debt and said, okay, this much is related to future development. We're going to pay for that with capital connection fees. And because connection fee revenues have not been what they once were in many, many years now, we've been monitoring this at the staff level and tracking that to see how much of a loan would be necessary and when that would occur. I've warned council previously that at some point the connection fee fund would go red and go into the negative. The operating fund and all the funds combined have sufficient cash flows to pay those debt service amounts in the meantime. But this is the first year as of June 30th, 2017. The fund had an overall deficit cash balance of just under $433,000. And that's right here where the 16-17 intersects and it goes below zero. The $433,000 negative isn't all that bad. It's a pretty small negative, but it's anticipated to go deficit about $1.5 million by the end of the current fiscal year, 17-18, because the amount budgeted for capital connection fee funds are insufficient to cover the approximately $1.5 million of debt service that we charge to the capital connection fee fund. So this isn't something that council needs to get overly concerned with at the moment. I'm just wanting to make sure that I keep you informed of the status of this fund and where we're at overall, because you do not see this in the city's financial report that will be presented to you from the auditors in December.
Through the mayor?
Yes.
Hey, Robin, we have 3 subdivisions that should be in the process for 17-18, or the latter part of this year. Well, this year's done, but 17-18. Water connection fees, so shouldn't that go up towards the fall of 17-18? Instead of going downhill, shouldn't we start to go back up with, 3 different, so we got 300 connection fees. They're not going to be hooked up 300 houses all at once, but we're going to have, 300 lots.
When we get those connection fees, that will help tremendously. The 220 homes from the Prop 84 waterline project generated $1.6 million in connection fees. That helped us bounce some here and get our cash flows back up to some degree. So that will definitely help if those materialize for us.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. This is a summary of the city's wastewater fund on a budget versus actual basis for revenues and expenditures and all the operating activities. Shows operating revenues ended the year at about 98% of the amount budgeted, right there, with actual revenues being about $152,300 less than budgeted. Capital connection fee revenues were $105,500 higher than expected. Of this, $70,900 was in the capital connection fee fund account. $12,000 was in special connection fees, the Bogue Road connection fee account, and $14,200 in investment income. Operating expenditures were at about 91% of the amounts budgeted. The savings equaled $896,900 less than budgeted, and in reviewing the detail, it was about $352,000 in salaries and benefits, $99,000 in professional services, $61,000 dues and subscriptions, $34,000 in buildings and facility O&M, and $323,000 in chemicals. This is what this wastewater fund's debt service coverage looks like. We consistently maintain and exceed the 1.2 required ratio. The wastewater fund is fiscally more healthy than the water fund, which I think you would expect given the drought conditions that we had for many years. And this is a similar slide that shows you the wastewater connection fee cash versus the debt service. It still has gone below, the cash balance has gone below what our annual debt service is here. That's why the green line is less, as budgeted for 17-18, but that's based on budget. If we have the development occur that we think may very well happen, then we will not drop below that line. And the debt service on the wastewater side coming from connection fees is significantly less than the water fund. It's only about $800,000 per year, so it takes less in connection fees to support that debt service load. And with that, I'll answer any questions you have.
Any questions from the council members? A lot of information there.
There is.
I was kind of hoping she could go through it again.
You didn't get a long enough nap, is that what it was?
Thank you,
No.
Robin.
Yeah, thank you, Robin.
You're welcome.
I do know that our efforts have been here from the council is to bring back some housing connections and business connections, and that our policies would be an encouragement for business to expand and grow here, to come in here, for get some more housing, without compromising our smaller town feel and, you know, the culture that we have here. And I think citizens have noticed that there have been significant improvements in those areas here. We're just waiting for the houses to happen, which are, we're acquiring land to put roads in different locations to continue this for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. So if we can continue to do that and are successful, some of those graphs will no longer be this way. They'll be trending a little bit more upwards. So we're planning on continuing that posture and attitude of our policies. So it's been good to see this report. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on.